Were the castles in Britain built with the plunder from indigenous peoples? A colleague of mine wrote to me the following. Another issue is how much Europeans stole the riches from the lands they invaded. Every time I see one of those castles in the UK, I'm sick to my stomach because I know those were built with gold that belonged to the indigenous people that Brits killed and robbed. My colleague is a university professor, well-published, received his education from one of the best universities in California, and a bright guy. But he knows little about history. He knows little of British imperialism and apparently nothing about castles. If you Google a list of famous or great British castles, you will find many of these 10 castles on most of the lists. Dover Castle, Kenilworth Castle, Tintagel Castle, Bolsover Castle, Portchester Castle, Warkworth Castle, Dunstanburgh Castle, Carisbrooke Castle, Middleham Castle, and Beeston Castle. If you read the history of these castles, most started off as Roman garrisons, and many were the forts or outposts of kings and rulers during the early part of Anglo-Saxon history. The castles as we think of them, with moats, drawbridges, towers, and thick stone walls were built during the 10th, 11th, and 12th centuries. At that time, a castle was a sound defense against invaders. The invaders would have to lay siege to the castle, which meant surrounding the castle and waiting until the people inside were starving to death and gave up. Rarely was a castle ever taken by storming the walls. By the 17th and 18th centuries, the heyday of British imperialism, the castles were no longer an effective deterrent against invaders, because by that time armies had cannons, and even the stone walls of a castle could not withstand the pounding of cannonballs. So, during the British imperialist era, no money was being used to build castles. Those castles predated British imperialism by 500 years. I wonder why my learned colleague doesn't know that. Okay, so he made a mistake, or made up something because he probably never felt sick to his stomach looking at castles in the first place. But what about the money the British did take as part of their imperialistic activities? Well, certainly there were some treasures which the British found while on their imperialist escapades. But the reality is most of the wealth the British achieved was achieved by harvesting the natural resources from faraway lands through fishing, trapping, farming, trading, and harvesting nature's bounty. Encyclopedia Britannica defines imperialism as follows. Imperialism, state policy, practice, or advocacy of extending power and dominion, especially by direct territorial acquisition or by gaining political and economic control of other areas. Because it always involves the use of power, whether military or economic or some subtler form, imperialism has often been considered morally reprehensible, and the term is frequently employed in international propaganda to denounce and discredit an opponent's foreign policy. When we think of imperialism, the reference tends to be to the imperialism practiced by Europeans beginning in the 16th century, when explorers, on behalf of the governments of Europe, set off across the globe. The purpose for these voyages were many, including finding sea routes to acquire spices, which historically had come overland. Competition in Europe over resources. Remember, this period in Europe was one of constant conflict and wars and territorial expansion. However, Encyclopedia Britannica goes on to point out that imperialistic policies have been carried out by governments since the dawn of time and cites imperialism in history by the Chinese, Assyrians, Persians, Greeks, Romans, and Islamic rulers of the day, to name just a few. While some countries engage in imperialism more than others, if you read the definition, it is hard to imagine any country that has not engaged in some form of imperialism during its existence. It is interesting that my colleague's stomach is only upset by British imperialism. He is well-traveled, having visited more countries around the globe than I have. He has never mentioned his stomach being made sick by Roman imperialism, Greek imperialism, Russian imperialism, Japanese imperialism, Chinese imperialism, Persian imperialism, Turkish imperialism, Hindu imperialism, Gujarat imperialism, or any other imperialism on the planet. So why is my colleague fixated on Britain? What did the British do that the Germans, Japanese, Russians, or Turks not do? German, Russian, Japanese, and Chinese imperialism killed some 200 million or more people in the last century alone. Why isn't my colleague sick to his stomach over that? I think I know why. Britain, while expanding its empire across the globe through imperialist adventures, was still the country governed by one of the first elected governments. It was the country that ended slavery not by war, but by the will of the people. It was the country that was fundamental to the philosophies of freedom and liberty upon which the United States was founded. It was the country that put its very existence at risk to defy the imperialism of Germany. It is a country that rejected world hegemony by leaving the European Union, and it is a country whose people are proud of their legacy, their royal family, and their history. It is also the imperialist Britain that left in its wake of imperialism some of the most prosperous and freest places on the planet, including Canada, the United States, Hong Kong, Singapore, Malaysia, India, Australia, New Zealand, Ireland, and certainly at one time, South Africa. You see, Britain represents a concept we know as Western culture or Western civilization. Western culture is a culture that developed in Western Europe over many centuries, which was based on Judeo-Christian values, and that culminated in concepts such as individualism, freedom, liberty, equality, and capitalism. Has the history of Western culture been all good? Of course not. It includes imperialism, slavery, and wars. Yet the result was the establishment of the American system that combined limited government, free enterprise, individual freedoms, and equality, and which resulted in a system still better than any other system of human organization. But my friend is a globalist. He believes in open borders, world government, and no religion. He believes in equity through government intervention and more government rules and regulations. He believes in the elites who know better ruling the common folk for their own good. He believes in the suppression of free speech. He believes no one should be proud of their country. No wonder he doesn't like the British.